According to Transport Minister Ong Ye Kung, Singapore will negotiate air travel bubbles with safe countries or regions. That's an arrangement that's meant for general travelers that does not require a controlled itinerary. They come, of course, on top of other measures like unilaterally lifting border restrictions, and they're all part of Singapore's plans to revive its air hub. Well, that's a welcome back visitors, bring back jobs. All that while doing it safely. But how much can these travel bubbles boost our tourism sector? How much can it save Singapore's status as an air hub in the world? Plus, youths, they're the future of Singapore, right? And the new generation increasingly wants and has to have this say in things. But how can the government take on board their input to co-create solutions? Helping Singapore businesses, that's of course of utmost importance for our government as well. There's the need for digitalization, and that's been making a lot of headlines over the past few months. But what more can businesses do to seize opportunities to transform and prepare for the world of digitalization? We've got a lot of topics to dive into, and in the studio this morning, my guest is Minister of State's Ministry of Trade and Industry and Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, Alvin Tan. Good morning, Minister of State. How are you?
Good morning, Elliott. Good morning also to all the listeners of Money FM.
Thanks a lot for taking the time. Before we dive into all these topics, you've got a very diversified resume. Let's try and run through this, a bit of street cred building right now. You've been in the Singapore Armed Forces, the Ministry of Defence, United Nations, Goldman Sachs, non-profit Oxfam. You've also worked at Facebook, LinkedIn. In fact, at LinkedIn, you were the head of public policy and economics for the Asia-Pacific region. And now you're in politics. You've been in the job since the 1st of September, 1 month-ish. How's it been for you so far?
Elliott, it's been a sprint. I think it's all of those experiences and all of those put together, supercharged into 1 month.
Yeah.
But it's been quite an experience.
You know, going into politics, I mean, what motivated you to get into politics? I'm guessing you've been around people so much, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for about 16 years on the ground in the community. Met many different people. Ryan, for example, is one of the residents that I've met on the ground in Chinatown as well. And so you need to learn and you need to want to know people, get to know them and want to make an impact in their lives. And I think at this stage, you get to do a little bit more.
I know it's early days, but have you crafted out what you want to achieve in your career as a politician?
Yeah, I'm looking at it at a short term first. Right?
Okay.
And I think if people say, you got to go take a long view, as it were. And yes, you do take a long view on these things. But at the very, very short term, you want to be in the thrust now. And a lot of us going in this class of 2020, what we're effectively doing is we're being thrust into the frying pan, into the fire, as it were, right? And coming into both COVID-19, a once-in-a-generation pandemic, and then having to deal with lives and livelihood. So my first immediate objective is to help to get us out of this. And of course, in the longer objective, make sure that we continue to remain competitive and a country that everybody wants to live in.
If we were to talk about plugging the gaps, I mean, there always are gaps, and that's why you have multi-roles and everyone has something to offer. For you personally, what would you say you have to offer in terms of experience or skill sets? What do you feel makes you stand out?
Yeah, I think all of us play a part in this bigger team, right? And you want to put in different people with different skill sets. I think myself, you see Second Minister Tan See Leng, we're two newbies, as it were, coming direct from the private sector into the cabinet. But then you also have others that have multiple years of skill within the civil service, and that's very important.
Sure.
You have to have a good mix of people who know the system, but then also people to inject fresh ideas, fresh processes into the system as well. I think it makes it healthy.
Yeah. So the government's done a lot over the past year. I mean, we've been talking about it a lot on air, on broadcasting, multiple schemes. Recently, they did come out to say, you can't save every job. That's fair. Schemes will have to be more targeted. So how does the government make the decision on what to prioritize? It's never easy. What's the process like?
Yeah, Elliott, is so difficult right now, and I don't think we want to trivialize it. But this COVID-19 has been thrusted upon not just us, but the whole world, right? And so you look and see that there are many different governments grappling with the crisis. And I think in the early days, people thought, okay, couple of months we'll be out of the woods. We're not out of the woods. We don't see ourselves being out of the woods anytime soon. or anytime in the near to midterm. Yeah. And why? Because in the early days when we thought that we would be out of the woods, COVID-19 has thrown us many, many, many different curveballs. And I think there will be even more curveballs. And what ought governments and societies do, I think we ought to be as nimble as possible. And we will make some missteps, but we ought to try. And so if you look at all of these different schemes coming into play, a lot of it is in two things. One is in response to an ever-evolving dynamic crisis.
Okay.
Number one, how do you keep people safe? What kind of processes do you have? Wearing masks, not wearing masks, maintaining social distancing, things that hitherto we haven't been used to in society. Yeah. Then on the livelihood front, what kind of assistance do you want to give to our businesses? And how do you deliver those assistance? And how do you make it as equitable as possible? Which kinds of jobs do you try to save? Yeah. Which do you say, okay, this is permanently changed and we have to help people to exit or pivot? And these are not at the policy level because these impact people's lives. Yeah. And coming into politics, it's all about people's lives, right? And you see when you make these decisions and people say, oh, this is my livelihood, you're not allowing me to open up. But at the same time, people say, okay, thank you for doing this because you're keeping us safe. So it's always this tension that you have to grapple with in seat.
I think, to be fair, I mean, this is one situation where, and I'm sure in the past you've heard complaints like, government, they don't know lah, they're all on the high horse. But you can't say that anymore because it affects everyone. Yes. Even, the most powerful man in the world is affected by it, right? To be fair. So talking about helping workers and businesses through this pandemic, there's always this focus on how you have to prepare for the future. So, I mean, what kind of plans can we expect? I know some have been rolled out, some schemes have been rolled out, but what are you looking into right now?
Yeah, well, there are a multitude of schemes. So there are a few things that I want to unpack first. Okay. First is that we need to make sure that people are safe. That's the ultimate one priority. I'll just give you a quick snippet yesterday. I was in the market yesterday, Tekka Market, and I was speaking to two different store owners. The first told me, Minister, can you please open up this so that I can do more businesses? Yeah. And she said, and I said, well, if we open it up too quickly and we do it quite wantonly, then we may have to close a lot more like we had in CB. The other shopkeeper said, hey, thank you for doing this so that we can then open safely and we can do our business. Now, so that's that tension. So the thing is first keeping people safe. At the same time, what we then need and ought to do is to see how to reopen safely. And we do it quite systematically to see, okay, well, these are available to open safely. These are potentially we need to take on a little bit longer time, like the nightlife, for example. Places where it's riskier. Then the third one is then at the same time, while all of these businesses that have been affected by closures and COVID-19 are taking a bit of an interregnum, what we need to do then is to help to upskill those workers so that when the winds pick up again, they're ready to fly. Yeah, I think that's the overall perspective.
To be safe and to get that maximum recovery in that sense. Speaking of maximum recovery, we got to get into traffic. But when we continue, I want to turn our attention to the travel industry. That really affects all of us. We love to travel here in Singapore. We'll get into that in just a while. Minister of State, Ministry of Trade and Industry, and Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, Alvin Tan, in the studio with me. We'll continue after traffic. Money FM 89.3. Good morning. It's the Breakfast Huddle. I'm Elliott Danker, this morning speaking with Minister of State, Ministry of Trade and Industry, and Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, Alvin Tan. Minister of State, we're going to pick up with tourism. That's a hot topic. And I understand that this is part of your portfolio, and we've seen the government pump in a lot of money, 45 million to this marketing campaign over the past few months by Singapore Tourism Board and other agencies. It is, of course, one of the worst hit, probably the worst hit by COVID-19. How much more do you think can be done, just focusing on those air travel bubbles? How much more do you think can be done for the tourism sector once those open up? I know the focus is on safety, obviously.
Yeah, Elliott, the tourism industry is a very important industry for Singapore. We are, as everybody knows, a small island, and we've been receiving a lot of tourist arrivals pre-COVID. Yes. We're building Singapore as a tourist hub where people want to come experience not just our country, but also Southeast Asia. And of course, naturally, it's been hit significantly. What we've been doing then, since 1st of July, let me put it in a couple of buckets. The first is reopening. Okay. We want to be able to reopen safely. And so we've done a couple of these things in steps. The first is on 1st of July. Tours and attractions are now open. So we've had about 40 attractions, about 130 different tours now available here in Singapore. The hotels are doing a little bit better now. What we call an average occupancy rate is trending upwards. Yeah. So there is some robust demand, domestic demand for hotels. So book your staycations. Our MICE industry also, which has been a key pillar of the tourism industry, since 1st of October, we've received about 200. We've received applications to pilot MICE programs, and you can have up to 250 attendees at these MICE programs. And then I know people are talking a little bit about the cruises now. So in November, we're opening up 4 different cruises, 2 cruise lines. First is the Genting one in November, and then the Royal Caribbean in December. And I know people who would have had some concerns about cruises, but STB, the Tourism Board, has this cruise safe certification, and they're putting in multiple layers of safety features, SMM processes to make sure that people are safe. And in fact, Singapore is not the only one that is open on the cruise front. I mean, other countries such as Taiwan, for example, or other cities such as Taiwan and Norway, they've also opened up. So we're not the first to do that. So that's reopening safely. But also we're thinking about how do you want to make sure that we have in the short term, what are the features of recovery? Yeah. And we're a couple of different things. The first is we spent about $45 million to remarket Singapore. And it's called, as though it needs further remarketing, it's called the SG Rediscovers, right? It's a play on the word. Yeah. And SG Rediscovers is to help to spur interest in our domestic tourism. So if you look at, Little India, Chinatown, all of these are Sentosa, for example, parts of our Singapore Rediscovery campaign. Later on this year, we will be also launching Singapore Rediscovers Vouchers. And that's $100 for every adult Singaporean above the age of 18. And if you're under the age of 18, you still get $10 off tickets. And this is primarily for hotels, attractions, and tours. Now, a lot of it is meant to be an economic catalyst, to encourage our people to spend on all of these different ones, hotels, attractions, and tours. That's important to help to boost domestic demand while borders are primarily closed at the moment. And then there are also many of our attractions that have new ideas. I was just recently at Sentosa Resorts World, and they had this new aqua gastronomy where you can dine with sea creatures. That's one. I had with my son in his birthday party, a very small digital birthday party. We went online with the World Resorts, with Wildlife Singapore, Wildlife Reserve Singapore on the zoo, and they do a back of house kind of thing for the kids. So many of these attractions and tours are starting to digitalize or innovate to capture domestic demand, at least in the short term.
I don't mean to put you on the spot with this next question, but it is in relation to the Singapore Rediscovers Vouchers. We have spoken to a lot of tour agencies and whatnot, and there has been concern that people will take the $100 and go to for staycations instead, and it's sort of a imbalance in recovery in that sense. The hotels benefit more. Is this something, I'll keep it easy, is this something that the government will be monitoring to see how it goes? Because it's going to take a while, right? Yeah. To be fair.
Yeah. I think we have to err on the side of doing something. And I think all of these different vouchers or grants, there will be ways in which we can implement it in a way that it benefits as many people as possible. So the whole purpose of it coming back to the vouchers is to stimulate demand for the local tourism economy. And there will be trickle-down effects. And in fact, STB is helping hotels to work. And by the way, hotels mean that there's a whole spectrum of hotels, from those at the higher end to those mom-and-pop ones at the lower end. Right. And that involves also tours from a whole spectrum. So we're trying to cover the ground as much as possible. We're trying to look at ways in which, and in fact, helping them to come up with packages so that it just doesn't benefit one segment, but it benefits a whole tourism ecosystem. And I think that's the purpose of these vouchers. Well,
thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about youths. Of course. I know this is under your portfolio. MCCY. To start off, easy, not so easy question. Very general. What do you think youths in Singapore need to thrive in the future? Because I'm lost. I mean, the world is changing so quickly, and you've worked in other countries before. How do our youth really measure up to youth in other countries? How do we stack up in terms of this hunger, this desire to constantly upgrade in that sense?
I think the best the best answer to this is you have to ask the youth. I think they would know themselves the best. As just a recently ex-youth myself, I think there are many things that you learned over the course of time.
Yeah.
And Singapore is just a small island, but the world is their oyster, literally. And the world is an oyster that has been made in starker terms because of digitalization.
True.
And in fact, earlier this morning we were just talking about the different ways in which they are now digital natives, right? And then many of us and many different folks are digital immigrants, and that's a difference. You come in straight, right smack into the digital world, and that has both upsides and downsides. On the upside, it opens up a vista to opportunities, right? Ways to connect, ways to build new enterprises, and that's absolutely exciting. And we've seen youth, we've seen businesses start to adapt digitalization, connect with people, build new businesses on Instagram, build new businesses on Facebook and other platforms, and bring people together. But at the same time, we talked about what youths are thinking. And I wanted to share a little bit about this, about NCCY and our youth division and NYC. It's a very interesting way of framing it. The first is we want youth to be heard, be empowered, and be the change. So if you look at this spectrum, the be heard aspect is youth want to be heard, of course. Actually, all of us want to be heard. But youth want to say, hey, my voice is important in the conversation. And that straddles the society, economics, and others. And so we want them to be able to be heard. And we're providing a lot of different platforms, in addition to the multitude of platforms that they already have. So, for example, we have the Youth Action Plan, where it's rolled out by NYC, where youths are planning for what they want to see. It was rolled out in 2019. Youths are planning what they want to see in Singapore in 2025. So that's talking, that's planning. And then you move on to action, right? And youth want to be empowered for action. You have Youth Action Challenge, where youth can come together, create new ideas, and then there is also government funding to help support them to create these new ideas. I think that's really important. We need to give them the agency to co-create. There are a couple of different things which youth are really tell us that they're really interested about, and I'll give you a couple of examples. They're interested in bread and butter issues. They're interested in the future of work. What does work in the future? In fact, the future is accelerated, right?
Yeah.
What are they interested in?
In 5 years.
In 5 years. Second, sustainability, the green environment. Third, the impact of COVID and others on vulnerable segments. So these are the kind of different things that they are keen on, and we want to engage them on and turn those issues that they care about into action.
We are, in 2020, where we're supposed to see 5 different generations in the workforce, and it's only going to get more crowded. And on that note, we are running a little bit out of time. Where youths are concerned, and then you have this whole, helping Singaporean startups. You have the whole look at innovation and entrepreneurship. Where do you see this road leading towards? I mean, is this the right time for innovation and entrepreneurship then?
It's always the right time, Elliott, for innovation and entrepreneurship, because the possibilities are endless, right? You have a canvas. It's a digital canvas, and you can put whatever ideas that you have onto this canvas, test. It fails, some of it succeed. We have 7 out of 13 Southeast Asian unicorns here in Singapore, right? And the tech startup scene is vibrant, for example. There are already about 3,600 tech startups in Singapore, creating 18,000 jobs. But those are just figures. But you have that canvas now. You can create new kinds of jobs, new kinds of opportunities, new kinds of platforms. I was just recently at Startup Weekend about a couple of weeks ago, and the youth were just thinking about different ways to hack. And this is a hack culture in tech, right? So they're thinking of ways in which to help to improve mental health, create new businesses, help to bridge the digital divide. And a lot of these ideas will be transformed into action. A lot of the companies that you've seen, for example, Carousel and others, they started off at Startup Weekend. And then after some time, after mentorship, networking, they start to build them into viable companies and create jobs and create job opportunities. Very important. There is never a better time to innovate.
I want to squeeze in one last one.
Sure.
Because before we set up this meeting, amongst us, we nicknamed you Mr. LinkedIn. Because of your past in LinkedIn, you, of course, just to repeat, you were the head of public policy and economics for the Asia-Pacific region at LinkedIn. Tough job market now. You think in about 30, 45 seconds, you could share with us some tips on writing a great LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, well, everyone get started. Because as we mentioned, it's digital now. You don't want to write something in a piece of paper and email somebody. Your LinkedIn resume is dynamic. Right? People know, I've just changed a job. I've just acquired a new skill. Yeah. I've just made this remark, or I've just posted something. That's your dynamic online persona of yourself. Right. And in fact, I've hired so many people looking at their LinkedIn profile. So do a couple of things. Get your photo on. Make sure it's a nice photo, not something that you just got out of bed in. Yeah. Make sure that you have all of your skills, education on, your job experience on, and most importantly also get people to recommend, people who know you, who can vouch for you. Right. Get them to recommend. Elliott is a great radio host, for example.
Right.
And those
Jim's
things.
Getting worried now.
Yeah.
If I'm asking this question.
Maybe some. But I've hired people. Yeah. I've headhunted people on LinkedIn, and I think it couldn't be more important at this stage. Yeah. So get started.
World.
Yeah,
this is the world now. Yeah. I've been speaking with Minister of State, Ministry of Trade and Industry, and Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, Alvin Tan. Minister of State, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elliott. Thank you, all the listeners as well.
This conversation written and produced by Nadira Kamarudin.
Mr. Alvin Tan, Minister of State, Minister of Trade and Industry, and Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, with Elliott Danker, only on Money FM 89.3.